"Ma'am, your daughter is screaming in the lobby." Clarissa's heart dropped. She spun on her heels, nearly dropping her phone mid-call. The maitre d's voice was tight, clipped with panic, not the kind a five-star restaurant was known for. She was right behind me. Clarissa's stilettos clicked across the marble like gunshots. Her breath caught halfway through her chest. The noise hit her before the scene did, a high-pitched wail, piercing, raw. Then the stunned silence of a crowd unsure what to do. Lena, 7 years old, crouched beside the host stand arms, wrapped around her knees, trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. Her face was hidden, her body rocking. Guests stared. Waiters froze. One man pulled out his phone. "Don't film her," Clarissa snapped, ice slicing through her voice. A young hostess leaned in. "We tried to speak to her." She started screaming louder. "We didn't want to touch." "I've got it," Clarissa said, though she didn't. She took one step closer, and Lena flinched, let out another shriek even louder. Clarissa stopped cold. Her own child flinching from her. People were whispering. A manager radioed for security. Clarissa's lips parted, desperate to find something, anything that would help her daughter recognize safety. But before a single word could escape, a sound sliced through the tension. Soft, gentle. A whistle. Not a sharp one, not loud. A slow, low melody barely audible over the hum of the restaurant. But somehow Lena heard it. Everyone did. Because the room stilled. One by one, heads turned to the far end of the lobby, to the janitor. He stood by, a mop bucket tan uniform rolled to the elbows, graying brown curls tucked under a faded ball cap. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He just leaned slightly against his mop handle and kept whistling. The tune meandered. Sweet, familiar. Lena froze. Her breathing slowed. The janitor moved slowly, deliberately, not toward her, but to the side. Sat down on the edge of the planter box like he had all the time in the world. Whistling. One note rolled into the next. A lullaby with no words. And Lena. She looked up. Clarissa forgot to breathe. Her daughter blinked once, twice. Then, inch by inch, she uncurled from the fetal position and simply sat. Listening. Wide-eyed. A thread of recognition dancing behind her pupils. No one moved. No one dared. Then the janitor did something astonishing. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a napkin, and with the gentlest hum, began folding it. A slow, practiced rhythm. Lena watched, transfixed. In 30 seconds, he had shaped a delicate little bird. He placed it on the floor inches from her, then slid it forward with one finger. Still whistling, still silent. Lena stared at the paper bird like it might breathe. Clarissa's hand went to her mouth. She hadn't seen her daughter this calm, this present in weeks, maybe longer. Then Lena did something even more astonishing. She reached out, took the paper bird, and whispered, "It's blue." A whisper. Clarissa's knees buckled just slightly. Her eyes welled up uninvited. The janitor glanced up at her for the first time, just a nod, a barely there smile. Then he stood, picked up his mop, and walked away as if none of it had ever happened. Clarissa found her voice only as he was halfway down the hall. "Wait." He paused, turned. Clarissa stepped forward, heels echoing through the lobby's stunned silence. She stopped in front of him, trying to find composure. Failed. "That song," she said. "Where did you hear it?" The janitor looked at her. Really, looked at her for the first time. His eyes weren't just kind. They were tired. Tired the way a man gets when he's carried grief longer than he carried love. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe from a lifetime ago." Clarissa studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. "That melody. My daughter, she only ever heard it from me. When she was 2. He nodded once. She remembered it. That's what matters. Who are you? He hesitated, then extended a hand. Graham Ellis, janitor, Tuesdays through Saturdays. Clarissa didn't shake it. She stared at his palm, then back at his face. You're not just a janitor. Graham gave a half shrug. Maybe not today. A pause. Then Lena's voice soft from behind her mother. "Mommy." Clarissa turned, startled. Her daughter stood holding the paper bird against her chest. "Can he come to dinner?" Clarissa blinked. Graham, already turning to leave, stopped. Clarissa looked at him again, at the man with calloused hands who had quieted a storm without saying a word, at the stranger who'd done in 60 seconds what her private therapists hadn't managed in 6 months. For the first time in years, Clarissa felt something crack beneath her ribs. It wasn't fear. It was hope. "I'll find you," she said softly. Graham tipped his cap. "Only if you bring dessert." Then he was gone, and Clarissa Whitmore, billionaire power broker woman who once took down an entire pharmaceutical board in heels, sharper than stilettos, stood in the middle of her own world, realizing for the first time in years she wasn't the one in control anymore. The steam from her untouched tea spiraled upward, soft and ghostly. Clarissa sat alone in the corner booth of her penthouse kitchen, elbows resting against the cold marble. She had replayed the moment at least 20 times since coming home. Lena's breathing, the paper bird, the whistle. Her daughter asked for dinner. It wasn't just a miracle. It was a memory Clarissa didn't know her daughter still carried. And it hadn't come from her. It had come from a janitor with kind eyes and quiet shoes. She looked down at the linen napkin she'd folded, tried to mimic his crane. Failed. It collapsed in her hands like everything else she'd tried lately. Across the room, Lena sat curled in her window nook, hugging her knees, the little paper bird perched beside her like it might fly if she let it. Clarissa cleared her throat. "You really liked the man from the restaurant, huh?" Lena didn't respond. Clarissa stood, walked slowly, knelt beside the window. Close, but not too close. He had a nice smile, she offered. Lena's eyes didn't leave the bird. "It's the sound," she whispered. Clarissa blinked. The whistling, Lena nodded. "I remembered it. From the yellow blanket days." Clarissa's chest tightened. The yellow blanket days, the nickname they used when Lena was small for the early years, back when Clarissa used to sing lullabies before the board meetings took over, before her own mother passed, before she replaced story time with Zoom calls. "I didn't know you still remembered that song," Clarissa said softly. "I don't," Lena murmured. But he did. Clarissa sat in the silence that followed her own daughter not looking at her, but remembering a part of her that she herself had forgotten. Later that night, while Lena finally slept soundly, paper bird still clutched in her hand, Clarissa stood in front of the hallway mirror staring at her own reflection like it was someone else's life. She reached for her phone, tapped the concierge. "I need a contact," she said. "For the janitor, Graham Ellis. I want to speak with him." There was a pause. "Yes, ma'am," came the answer. "Unusual request, but I'll reach out to facilities." "Tell him I'm inviting him to dinner," Clarissa said. "But it's not a request, it's an open door." Graham stood in the supply closet checking labels on mop refills when his work phone vibrated. He didn't recognize the number, but something about it made his gut shift. He picked up. Graham Ellis. A beat. Then, "It's Clarissa Whitmore." He leaned back against the shelving unit. "Did I miss a spot on the marble? You fixed something I didn't even know was broken." Graham was quiet. Then, "It wasn't me. It was the music." "She asked for you, Graham." He closed his eyes. His hand slipped into his shirt pocket, instinctively feeling for the edge of a folded paper, the one note he carried everywhere. Clarissa's voice softened. "I know this isn't your job. I know you're not a therapist. But she responded to you." "I don't do miracles," he said. "She doesn't need a miracle," Clarissa said. "She needs a memory," he exhaled. "Dinner Thursday, 6. Bring whatever you use to whistle, or don't. Just bring you." Graham chuckled under his breath. "Ma'am, I come with a lot of quiet. That's not everyone's favorite seasoning." There was a pause. Then Clarissa said something he wasn't expecting. "Maybe that's exactly what we've been starving for." He arrived at 5:55, not in a suit, not with a briefcase, but with his old brown boots scrubbed clean and a button-up that still smelled faintly of cedarwood and old sheet music. Clarissa greeted him at the door, barefoot, hair loose. Most people would have sent flowers, Graham said, glancing around the sleek interior. She shrugged. Most people don't make my daughter speak. He smiled slightly. Fair enough. They entered the living room. Lena sat in a pile of cushions, the bird still nearby. When she saw him, she didn't speak. She simply stood, walked across the room, and handed him something, a napkin, a half-folded bird. I tried, she said. Graham knelt. This looks like a phoenix. Lena's lips twitched. It's supposed to be a crane, he whispered. Crane's just a fancy phoenix that hasn't risen yet. Clarissa stood still, watching her daughter smile for the first time in weeks, and not at a screen, not at a toy, but at a man who had nothing to sell and everything to give. They ate quietly. Graham whistled softly between bites, not a melody, just gentle sound. Lena hummed once. Clarissa nearly dropped her fork. After dinner, Graham helped with dishes. Clarissa leaned on the kitchen counter, arms crossed. I read your file, she said. Graham didn't look up. I don't have much of one. You were a pianist, music therapist. Before you lost my wife, he said, not harsh, not sad, just honest. Clarissa's voice softened. I'm sorry. He nodded once. She was the one who whistled first, he said. I picked it up after she passed. My daughter Becca left me a note before her first day of kindergarten. Said, keep whistling, Daddy. It helps people. Clarissa stared at him. You carry that with you? Graham tapped his pocket. Always. She paused, then asked quietly, So what do you think Lena needs? He looked at her finally. Not at the CEO, not the facade, but the woman underneath. She needs someone who won't try to fix her. Clarissa flinched. I'm not trying to fix her. Graham didn't interrupt, just waited. Then she whispered, Maybe I am. He nodded. Sometimes kids don't need solutions. They need someone who can sit in the silence with them and not run. Clarissa swallowed hard. I haven't sat still in 7 years. Graham smiled gently. Then maybe it's time. As he left, Lena stopped him at the door. Will you come back? Graham crouched, looked her in the eyes. Only if you promise to teach me how to fold a phoenix. Lena beamed. Clarissa's voice followed him as the door shut softly behind him. Thank you. He didn't turn, just whispered to no one in particular. Keep whistling, Daddy. It helps people. And the hallway filled for just a moment with the hum of something long forgotten. Stillness. The elevator ride to the 35th floor was silent save for the soft creak of Graham's knuckles as he flexed them behind his back. He wasn't sure what felt more surreal, being invited back a second time, or the way the little girl had looked at him last night. Like he wasn't just a janitor or a man who could whistle, but someone who remembered something important that everyone else had forgotten. He stepped out into the gleaming penthouse hallway where everything was white glass and soft lit like a place untouched by noise or dust or reality. Clarissa opened the door before he knocked as if she'd been standing just behind it. You're early, she said. You're barefoot again, he replied. She blinked, then glanced down at her feet. I didn't even realize. That's usually a good sign, he said with a faint smile. She stepped aside without comment, but the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. Inside, Lena was already waiting. This time, not in a fortress of pillows, but cross-legged on the floor, a notebook open in front of her, crayons scattered like tiny explosions of color. When she saw Graham, she looked up but didn't stand. Just pointed at the empty space across from her. You sit there. No, please, Graham teased. She considered that, please, but only because Mom's watching. From behind him, Clarissa let out a soft breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. He sat across from Lena, adjusting his knees with a quiet groan. Getting old is a trap, kid. Don't fall for it. Lena handed him a crayon without looking up. We're drawing our safe place. Graham held the crayon like it might bite him. And what's yours? She didn't hesitate. Sound. He blinked. Sound isn't a place. She met his eyes. It is when you don't like people. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Clarissa sat nearby, but not too close. She didn't speak, just listened. something she was learning to do more of lately. After a while, Lena looked up. "Do you whistle all the time?" "Not always," Graham said. "Only when I don't know what else to do." She nodded solemnly. "That's why I hum." Clarissa's breath hitched. Graham glanced at her but said nothing. Lena picked up a new crayon. "Will you come every week?" Graham hesitated. Clarissa cleared her throat. "Actually, that's something we'd like to talk to you about." Graham raised an eyebrow. She looked him dead in the eye. "I'd like to offer you something more official. I already have a job. This wouldn't be cleaning floors. Then I'm even less qualified." "You're more qualified than any specialist I've hired," she said, firm, but not forceful. "And I've hired—" "A lot." He didn't answer immediately. Just glanced down at Lena, now drawing a spiral of blue that wrapped around a stick figure in the center. "I don't take charity," he said finally. "This isn't charity," Clarissa said. "It's partnership. I want you to be a part of her healing, not because I need a miracle, but because she asked for you." Lena looked up, quiet but clear. "You feel like the quiet before the stars come out." Graham swallowed. "I'll come," he said softly, "but on one condition." Clarissa folded her arms. "Which is no cameras, no articles, no doctors with clipboards in the corner pretending not to judge." She nodded. "Done. And I don't work for you." She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. I work with Lena. No titles, no pressure, just presence." Clarissa studied him. The kind of study a woman makes when she's built her empire on outmaneuvering men who underestimate her. But Graham wasn't playing a game. He was already holding the truth. Finally, she said, "Agreed." He extended his hand. "Then we have a deal." She took it. Her grip was warm, and not as certain as she wanted it to appear. That night, after Graham left, Clarissa sat in Alina's room beside her as she drew tiny birds along the border of her notebook. "Do you like him?" she asked. Lena nodded without looking up. Clarissa hesitated. "Why? Because he doesn't talk too much." Clarissa tilted her head. "Is that a good thing?" Lena thought for a moment. "Some people try to fix me with words, but he just listens with his shoulders." Clarissa blinked. "His shoulders?" Lena finally looked up. "Yeah, he doesn't lean in like he's scared of me, or lean back like I'm too much. He just sits, like a mountain." Clarissa's voice cracked. "You're not too much." Lena smiled softly. "I know. He told me, but not with words." Meanwhile, in a modest apartment 2 subway lines away, Graham sat at a chipped kitchen table, a grilled cheese sandwich untouched on the plate beside him. He unfolded the note from his daughter, creased and worn. "Keep whistling, Daddy. It helps people." He whispered into the stillness, "It helped her today." Then he folded it carefully, tucked it back into his pocket and whistled. Just once, soft and low, a single note that drifted upward like a promise. One he hadn't known he was still capable of keeping. And somewhere across the city, in a room filled with crayons and half-drawn birds, a little girl felt safe enough to sleep without a nightlight. For the first time in years. Because someone had finally sat still long enough to let her speak in silence. Graham stood outside the Whitmore penthouse with a modest paper bag cradled in one hand and a faint sense of déjà vu pressing against his ribs. He wasn't dressed like a therapist, and he certainly didn't carry himself like a man used to entering worlds that smelled like money and lavender. But somehow, this was becoming his rhythm, a new kind of tempo, where silence spoke louder than plans. The door opened before he knocked. Again. Clarissa, this time in a soft cream sweater and no shoes, looked different. Not dressed down, disarmed. And something about that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. "You brought something?" she asked, nodding toward the bag. "Nothing fancy," he said. "Just bread. The kind you tear, not slice. My daughter says it makes the table feel less like a battlefield." Clarissa blinked, then stepped aside. "She sounds wise." "She's 10, Graham said. "She's earned it." They walked together down the hallway. For once, Clarissa didn't lead. She moved beside him. Lena was already seated at the table. It had been rearranged, no longer the long, clinical slab of crystal and chrome. Now it was a smaller round setup in the sunroom with mismatched cushions and a single candle flickering quietly in the middle. When she saw Graham, Lena didn't say a word. She simply reached into her sweater pocket and pulled something out, a tiny folded paper phoenix. Graham smiled. "That looks like it's ready to rise." Lena nodded. "I waited till you came back to finish the wings." He sat down gently. "That's the best kind of waiting." Clarissa joined them, setting down 3 bowls of warm lentil stew. No silver domes, no garnish, just warmth. Graham placed the bread in the center. "Family style," he said. Clarissa looked at him amused. "We don't really do family style here." "Maybe it's time to start," he said, meeting her eyes. The first few bites passed in soft quiet. Not awkward, intentional. Lena chewed slowly, dipping her bread like she'd done it 100 times before. Clarissa glanced at her, then at Graham. "She hasn't eaten this calmly in months." Graham said nothing, just kept eating. She used to gag at textures, Clarissa added. "We did everything. Occupational therapy, swallow training, feeding specialists. One even had her sniff essential oils before each bite." Lena rolled her eyes. "That one smelled like someone's purse." Graham snorted. "That's oddly specific." "Because it's true," Lena replied, deadpan. Clarissa blinked. "She's talking." Lena took another bite. "I'm eating. That's not the same thing." Graham raised a hand. "She's right." Clarissa tilted her head. "Is this a rule in your world?" He nodded. "Words are currency. You don't demand them, you earn them." Clarissa leaned back slightly. "What does that make me, a tax collector?" "No," Graham said, his voice warm. "You're just someone who's been knocking on the wrong door." Lena looked between them. "He means stop asking questions and just sit." Clarissa chuckled under her breath. "Is it weird that I'm being parented by a janitor and a 7-year-old? "Yes," Lena said. "But it's working." They shared a laugh. A real one, not polite, not performed, just human. Then came the quiet again, deeper this time. Not empty. Sacred. After dinner, Lena quietly slipped away to her room, leaving her phoenix on Graham's empty bowl like a thank you note. Clarissa watched her go, eyes soft. She left the door open. Graham nodded. "It's an invitation." "Not for me, for you." Clarissa sat back down, poured 2 cups of tea. No fancy china. Just stoneware and steam. "She used to be glued to my hip," she said. "Until she wasn't." He waited. One day she stopped humming. Then stopped making eye contact. Then words just dried up. Her voice wavered. "And I did what I do best, I fixed. I researched, I hired, I optimized, and in the process, Graham asked." She looked away. "I forgot to sit on the floor." The words hung there, heavy, honest. Graham leaned forward. "You know what Becca used to say back when she was struggling?" Clarissa looked at him. She said, "I don't want you to teach me how to swim when I'm drowning. I want you to get in the water with me." Clarissa closed her eyes. "That's brutal. It's true." She set her tea down, stared into the candle's flicker. "So what do I do now?" "Stop fixing. Start staying," Clarissa whispered, almost afraid to believe it. "You really think that's enough?" Graham smiled. "It's not about enough. It's about real. Kids don't care if you're perfect. They care if you're present." Clarissa nodded slowly. "That scares me." "Good," he said. "Scared means you care." They sat in silence for a moment more, then Clarissa said softly, "You're not what I expected. Most people aren't." Graham replied, "They're just what we assumed." She looked up at him, really looked, and in a rare moment she let the armor fall. "Will you come back Friday?" He stood gently, picking up the phoenix. "Only if there's bread. Always." As Graham walked to the door, Clarissa followed him. Just before he stepped out, she said, "Thank you for not walking away." He turned, offered a half smile. "Sometimes," he said, "the quietest thing we can do for someone is stay." And then he was gone, leaving behind nothing but a folded bird, and a space that felt a little less like a mansion and a little more like home. Lena stood in the hallway like a statue, silent, barefoot, holding a folded napkin in one hand and a single blue crayon in the other. Graham had just stepped inside brushing raindrops off his jacket when he noticed her. She didn't run to him. She didn't speak. She just lifted the napkin. "I made this last night," she said, "but I didn't finish it. I didn't know what color to use for the wings." Graham crouched slowly, letting the rhythm of her breathing guide his posture. And now, she placed the blue crayon on top of the folded paper. "Now I do." He nodded, took the crayon gently, and whispered, "Blue's the color of quiet things that don't need to be explained." Lena didn't smile. She just breathed. And that was enough. Clarissa appeared behind them holding 2 mugs. Her voice was softer than usual, stripped of its polish. "You always speak in riddles." Mr. Ellis Graham stood taking 1 mug with a quiet thanks. "Not riddles," he said. "Just slower truths." Clarissa tilted her head. "That sounds like something that belongs in a poetry book." Graham sipped his tea. "Or a janitor's pocket." Clarissa glanced down. "Speaking of, you always touch your pocket before you speak, habit." Graham hesitated, then slowly pulled out a worn, folded note, the edges frayed like the corners of an old photograph. He unfolded it and handed it to her. Clarissa read silently. "Keep whistling, Daddy. It helps people." The words were written in a child's handwriting, crooked and uneven but filled with warmth. "She gave that to me on her first day of kindergarten," Graham said. "She was scared. I was more scared. So I whistled all the way to the classroom door." Clarissa held the note like it might vanish. "Your daughter wrote this." He nodded. "Becca. She's 10 now, sharp as a tack, gentle as a breeze." Clarissa looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And your wife?" "She passed," he said simply. 4 years ago. Leukemia. Quick, quiet, cruel." A silence fell. Not uncomfortable, just full. "I'm sorry," she said, almost a whisper. "I used to be a music therapist," Graham added. "Worked in pediatric rehab clinics. Taught kids to trust their bodies again by teaching them rhythm." Clarissa blinked. "Then why?" "Why am I mopping floors?" he finished for her. She nodded, hesitating. He folded the note and slipped it back into his pocket like a sacred artifact. "Because when she died, I couldn't hear music anymore, not even in my own daughter's laugh. Everything became white noise." Clarissa's eyes softened. "So, you stopped playing?" He shook his head. "No, I stopped listening." Lena peeked from the hallway. "Are we drawing today?" Clarissa turned to her. "Whatever you want, sweetheart." Lena pointed to Graham. "He chooses." Graham smiled. "Then today, we draw where we go when we're scared." Clarissa raised an eyebrow. "That's not exactly light." Graham glanced at her. "Neither is life, but Lena doesn't need light. She needs honesty." Lena was already spreading out crayons on the floor. As they sat together on the rug, Graham and Lena sketching shapes with colors that whispered their own names. Clarissa sat on the couch nearby, observing. Graham drew a tree with twisted roots and a single swing. Lena watched him. "Is that where you go?" He nodded. "That's where I first told Becca I was scared. She said swings don't judge." Clarissa smiled faintly. Lena turned to her mother. "Where do you go when you're scared?" Clarissa hesitated. "I usually keep working." Lena blinked. "That's not a place." Clarissa's voice wavered. "No, but it's where I hide." Graham looked up, meeting her eyes. "Even adults build blanket forts. We just use email." That line hit Clarissa deeper than she let on. Later, as Graham prepared to leave, Clarissa walked him to the door. "Would you be open," she said carefully, "to coming twice a week?" Graham paused. "I thought I was already overpaid." She smiled. "You're not being paid?" He raised an eyebrow. "You're being trusted," she added. He tilted his head, thoughtful. "Trust is the better currency." Clarissa's voice dropped a tone. "Why are you really doing this, Graham? Why not go back to your clinic work?" He looked at her eyes, gentle but firm. "Because somewhere along the way I forgot how to be useful, not productive, not professional, just useful to someone who actually needs me." Clarissa didn't reply. She didn't need to. She just opened the door. Before he stepped out, Lena came running from her room. "Wait," She held out a piece of paper still warm from her hands. 3 stick figures, one with a bun, one with curly hair, one with glasses. A single word scribbled beneath them in crayon. Safe. Graham's voice caught. Is this for me? Lena nodded. You can put it next to the note in your pocket. He knelt and looked her in the eye. I'll keep it even closer. She leaned in, hugged him fast and shy. Clarissa watched from behind her hand covering her mouth. Because in that moment, for the first time in years, her daughter didn't flinch. She reached. And Clarissa knew with unshakable certainty they weren't just healing Lena. They were healing her too. The sky over Manhattan cracked open like a warning. Clarissa stood at the window of her corner office, arms, crossed eyes on the glass, as raindrops began to blur the skyline she once ruled with ruthless precision. Her assistant knocked once, then entered without waiting. There's a problem. Clarissa didn't turn. There always is. This one's viral. That made her look. He slid a tablet across the desk. On screen, a still frame. Clarissa barefoot in a soft cream sweater smiling as she stood beside Graham Ellis in her penthouse kitchen. Lena in the background laughing. The caption was brutal. Billionaire CEO plays house. With her janitor, but where's her daughter's father? Clarissa exhaled slowly. Cold heat rising up her spine. Where did this come from? A dinner guest leaked it. Or someone on your building's staff. Doesn't matter, it's trending now. She tapped the screen, watching the clip play. The audio was distant, but her own voice could be heard. You're not being paid. You're being trusted. Clarissa shut the tablet. I assume the board's seen this. He nodded. Greg Stanton's called 3 times this morning. HR wants to review the situation. They're using words like boundaries, conflict of interest, exposure. Clarissa's jaw tightened. They don't care about Lena. They care about optics. And stockholders. Of course they did. She turned back to the window. Send them all a meeting link, she said flatly. We'll talk at noon. When Graham arrived that evening, he knew something was off before the door even opened. The doorman didn't smile. The lobby receptionist looked away. And the elevator to the penthouse, which usually glided without a sound, stopped with a shudder that felt personal. Clarissa met him at the door, but not with warmth. She was in full armor, blazer heels, lips pressed tight. You saw it? She asked. I did, he replied calmly. You read the comments, I don't read noise. She stepped aside. Come in. Lena wasn't in sight. The living room was too clean, the table cleared. No crayons, no sketches, no paper birds. Graham set down his umbrella but didn't sit. Clarissa didn't either. The board is pushing for a statement, she said. Something clean, something sterile, a distancing. He nodded once. Let me guess I'm the risk. You're the unknown, she said, and in corporate language that's the same thing. A long silence. Then Graham asked softly, Do you want me to leave? Clarissa hesitated. No. Graham's brow furrowed. But you're scared, yes, of losing your position. She shook her head. Of losing her. That landed harder than anything else could. She turned away, staring out the window as the storm picked up thunder, groaning across the sky. I spent 7 years building a life no one could criticize, she whispered. Top-tier therapy. Speech coaches, elite schools, clean diets, screen-free zones. But the first time Lena looked someone in the eye and said a word. She turned back to him. It was because of you, a man with no certification, no diploma hanging on the wall, just a whistle, and stillness. Graham looked down. And you're being punished for letting me in. Clarissa nodded. They're giving me a choice. Graham's voice was steady. You fire me. Clarissa blinked. He stepped closer. Or, you stand beside me. The room fell still. Clarissa whispered, I don't know how. Graham didn't flinch. Then I'll show you. Lena peeked from the hallway, eyes wide. Are you leaving? Graham knelt. Not unless someone asks me to. She looked at her mother. Clarissa swallowed hard. He's not going anywhere. Lena stepped forward and reached for Graham's hand. He held it, gently, quietly. Clarissa watched them, her daughter who once recoiled from touch now standing beside a man with calloused palms and a soft gaze. The image would have been unthinkable just weeks ago, and now it was all that felt real. Later that night, Clarissa sat on her balcony, hair down, makeup gone, storm still humming in the distance. Graham sat beside her, a blanket draped across both their shoulders. "I was taught that power was protection," she murmured. "And what have you learned?" "That power without presence is just noise in a silk suit." He smiled faintly. "You're starting to speak in riddles now." She chuckled. "Must be contagious." A beat passed. Clarissa looked at him, truly looked. "I'm not asking you to save her, Graham." He shook his head. "Good, because she doesn't need saving. She needs seeing." Clarissa nodded. "Then stay." He turned to her, voice low. "I was always here. You just had to sit down." The next morning, a new post appeared online. Not a leak, not a headline. It was a video, uploaded from Clarissa's personal account. No filters, no production. Just her in front of a window, hair tied back, voice steady. "I'm not issuing a press statement," she said, "because this isn't about PR, it's about people. And the one who changed my daughter's world didn't have a title. Just time and tenderness." She paused. "If that disqualifies me from being your CEO, so be it. I'd rather be her mother." And with that, the storm began to pass. Not just in the sky, but in her soul. The empty room echoed with expectation. Clarissa stood in the center of what used to be a spare art studio. White walls, hardwood floors, no furniture. A blank canvas of a space she hadn't dared enter in years. It had once been her mother's studio, then hers, until life got louder and work got heavier. Now it was about to become Lena's. "She'll either love this," Clarissa said, brushing dust off the windowsill, "or bolt for the hallway screaming." Graham leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, observing. "Depends on what it smells like." Clarissa paused. "Smells like—" He nodded. "Kids sense things adults forget. Scent is memory. If this room smells like control, she'll feel it. If it smells like crayons and freedom, she might stay." Clarissa exhaled. "So, what do we do?" He stepped in, set a soft blue rug in the corner, rolled up from under his arm, then a tin box of crayons, a folding chair, a Bluetooth speaker, no sharp corners, no fluorescent lights, and no instructions. "You let the room breathe," he said, "and you don't name anything before she does." Clarissa tilted her head. "You think spaces can heal?" "I think the right space makes pain less defensive." She watched him work, quiet, intentional. Everything had a reason, a rhythm. He didn't control the room. He listened to it. Then he paused, looked at her. "You used to paint here, didn't you?" Clarissa blinked. "I haven't told you that." He nodded toward the far wall, faint outlines of brushstrokes still visible beneath the whitewash. "You tried to erase yourself." She folded her arms. "I thought starting over meant starting blank." "No," he said gently, "it means starting honest." They stood in silence, watching the light spill through the windows and land on the empty floor like music waiting to be played. When Lena entered the room, she didn't speak. She stood at the threshold, holding her breath, fingers twitching. Clarissa crouched, voice quiet. "It's yours." Lena looked around. The rug, the tin, the open space. Then at her mother. "No rules." Clarissa shook her head. "No rules." Lena turned to Graham. "No talking. Only if you ask." Lena stepped inside. It felt like watching a bird consider a sky it wasn't sure it deserved. She sat cross-legged on the rug, opened the tin, pulled out a red crayon, then put it back. Graham noticed. "Not red today." She didn't answer with words. She chose yellow. Clarissa felt her throat tighten. Yellow. The color Lena had stopped using after her grandfather died. She'd once called it sunlight for your skin, but for the last 2 years it had been too loud, too much. And now, here she was, drawing a sun. "Why yellow?" Clarissa whispered. Lena looked up thoughtful. "Because the room doesn't talk over me." Graham's eyes met Clarissa's. "That's what safety sounds like." Over the next hour, Lena filled the paper with floating shapes, stars, bubbles, vines that tangled but never closed in. She never once looked to either adult for approval. Graham whistled quietly under his breath. Clarissa sat on the floor cross-legged for the first time in years. She didn't give instructions. She didn't ask questions. She just stayed. Then Lena picked up a blue crayon and drew a doorway open wide with light spilling out. Clarissa asked, "Where does that lead?" Lena looked at her. "You, if you want to come in." Clarissa nearly lost it, not because of the drawing, but because for the first time in her life her daughter was inviting her to join instead of chasing her to follow. That night, after Lena had fallen asleep with her fingers still stained with color, Clarissa stood in the kitchen pouring tea for two. Graham sat at the table, hands wrapped around his own mug, quiet as ever. She used to be afraid of everything Clarissa said. Vacuum sounds, sudden light, the doorbell, even bath time. She wasn't afraid of those things, Graham said. She was afraid of being unprotected in those things. Clarissa looked at him. "You see her so clearly." He smiled. "I see the spaces between her words. That's where truth lives." Clarissa sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, almost hesitantly, she said, "Do you think I broke her?" Graham didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, voice gentle. "Children break all the time. So do adults. What matters is, who kneels beside them long enough to help them piece it back together?" Clarissa blinked, holding back emotion. "I was never taught how to kneel," she said. Graham's smile was soft. "Then maybe it's time you learn." She looked at him. "Why are you still here?" He didn't flinch. "Because your daughter asked me to stay." Clarissa exhaled a trembling breath. And if I asked Graham, looked at her, really looked. The armor was gone, the polish, the sharp angles. All that remained was a mother aching to be enough. "If you ask," he said softly, "I'll build the room around you too." And somewhere down the hall a girl slept with her hand on yellow crayon. No nightmares, no flinching, just breath, and bluebirds, and the memory of a room that didn't expect her to speak in full sentences to be heard. The envelope was ivory with a red seal thick as judgment and twice as cold. Clarissa stared at it on her kitchen counter like it might explode. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't need to. She knew that handwriting. Spencer Whitmore, Lena's biological father, ex-husband in title, stranger in practice, and now apparently a threat with excellent legal counsel. Graham sat across from her, arms resting gently on the edge of the island. He didn't speak, but his presence filled the space like warm light on a cold tile floor. Clarissa finally exhaled. "He's filing for emergency custody." Graham didn't react, just blinked slow and steady. On what grounds, he asked. She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Negligence. Unsupervised contact with an unqualified male influence. He called you a behavioral liability." Graham chuckled dry, not amused. "Big words from a man who hasn't called his daughter in 4 years. He's powerful," she said. "Well-connected. His attorney clerked for a federal judge, and—" "What does Lena say?" Clarissa swallowed. "She doesn't know. I haven't told her." Graham nodded, then pushed his tea aside and leaned in. "Tell her." Clarissa's eyes flashed. "Why?" "So she can spiral. So she stops sleeping again. So she can choose where she belongs," he said calmly. "If you want to teach her strength, you have to trust her with the truth." Silence hung thick. Clarissa looked down at her tea like it might hold better answers than she had. "Do you think I'm going to lose her?" Graham met her eyes. "Not if you fight the right way." 2 days later, the courtroom felt like a theater built for shame. Everything was glass marble, cold light. The judge's bench loomed high and the gallery seats were filled with curious strangers and a few reporters pretending not to take notes. Clarissa sat with her attorney's spine, straight face, unreadable. But her hands. Her hands trembled beneath the desk, hidden. Graham sat 2 rows behind her beside Lena. He didn't wear a suit. He wore the same soft blue shirt Lena had once whispered reminded her of peace. She hadn't let go of his hand since they entered the courthouse. Across the aisle, Spencer Whitmore wore power like a cologne, tailored expensive performative. His smile was smug, his legal team polished and predatory. The judge entered. Proceedings began. The opposing attorney rose voice syrupy and sharp. "Your Honor, we are here today because our client, Mr. Whitmore, has reason to believe his daughter is in an emotionally unstable environment due to the presence of an uncredentialed adult male who has assumed an inappropriate emotional role." Clarissa's jaw clenched. The attorney continued. "This man, Mr. Graham Ellis, has no psychological training, no clinical background, and no legal standing. He is, in fact, a janitor." A ripple moved through the gallery. One of the reporters smirked. Graham didn't blink. "Ms. Whitmore has allowed this man repeated unsupervised access to a minor with a known trauma history," the attorney added, "while denying Mr. Whitmore her legal father the right to be involved." The judge turned to Clarissa's side. Her attorney stood crisp and quiet. "Your Honor, we do not deny Mr. Ellis is not a licensed therapist. But we do offer this," he gestured. Graham stood. Clarissa's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected him to speak. He walked to the stand, slow and deliberate. Not with the gait of a man trying to impress, but one who has nothing left to hide. He took his seat. "State your name for the record." "Graham Ellis. Occupation, I clean floors. And sometimes, when needed—" "I listen." A murmur. The judge raised a brow. Clarissa leaned forward, heart racing. The defense attorney spoke again. "Mr. Ellis, are you a therapist?" "No." "A counselor, behavioral specialist?" "No." "Then what qualifies you to be so intimately involved with a vulnerable child?" Graham looked at him not harshly, but deeply. "I never tried to be qualified. I tried to be present." The room quieted. He turned to the judge. "I was a music therapist once, before my wife passed. After that, I lost my rhythm. My daughter gave it back to me in crayons and whispers and small moments that didn't need applause." He paused, then added, "I didn't walk into Lena's life to fix her. I sat with her long enough that she invited me in." The judge leaned forward. "Did you encourage her to reject her father?" "No, sir," Graham said. "But she knows who shows up." Then, from the back, a small voice broke the stillness. "I'd like to speak. Lena." Clarissa turned eyes wide. The judge blinked. "You are Lena Whitmore," she said, standing with a paper in her hands. "And I have something to show you." The judge nodded. Lena walked forward, no hesitation, no whispering, and handed the judge her paper. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures, one with glasses, one with a ponytail, one with curly hair, all holding hands beneath a tree. At the bottom in bright crayon, "This is my family, and I feel safe here." The judge studied the page, then looked back at Lena. "Why do you feel safe?" She looked at Graham. "Because he doesn't ask me to be better. He just lets me be." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Then, quietly, the judge said, "Thank you, Miss Whitmore." He turned back to the bench. Effective immediately, he ruled, Ms. Clarissa Whitmore retains full custody. All future parental claims will require supervised visitation, and Mr. Ellis may continue his involvement with Lena as long as mutually agreed. Clarissa covered her mouth. Lena ran to her. Graham remained seated, tears in his eyes. And across the aisle, Spencer's face fell like glass cracking under truth. Outside, under the gray sky, reporters shouted. But Graham knelt beside Lena on the courthouse steps, holding her hand. "You were brave," he said. Lena smiled. "I wasn't scared," she said. "I just remembered who listens." Clarissa joined them, eyes glistening. Then, without cameras rolling or speeches rehearsed, she reached for Graham's hand and held on. Because some victories don't sound like applause. They sound like silence finally safe. The first time Clarissa touched a piano in 10 years, it was Lena's idea. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. The city hummed softly below their windows, but inside the Whitmore penthouse time had slowed to a gentle hush. Lena tugged on Graham's sleeve as he finished folding laundry with Clarissa in the living room. I want to show you something, she whispered. Clarissa looked up. Where to, baby? Come, Lena said, taking both their hands. She led them down the hall and through a door Clarissa hadn't opened in years. The old music room. Dust still clung to the piano's frame like a forgotten sigh. The bench sat untouched. The sheet music that once danced in this space had long since been boxed away. I didn't know you remembered this room, Clarissa said, voice barely above a breath. I don't, Lena replied, but I know what it used to feel like. Graham walked over, ran his fingers along the lid of the baby grand. Yamaha. Mahogany. She's still beautiful. She was my mother's, Clarissa murmured. Passed it to me when I got my Juilliard letter. Graham blinked. You went to Juilliard? Clarissa gave a soft, embarrassed smile. For a semester. Then business school happened. And ambition, and fear. She stepped closer, placed a palm gently on the worn keys. She always told me, play what you can't say out loud. I didn't understand that until recently. Graham sat beside her on the bench. Do you remember how Clarissa laughed softly? My fingers might if I ask nicely. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor watching them both with the stillness of someone witnessing something sacred. Clarissa inhaled and played. The first note was hesitant like a foot testing ice, then another, then a third. Then suddenly the room filled not just with sound, but with memory. The melody wasn't complex, it wasn't polished, but it was honest, a lullaby built from ache and apology. Halfway through her hands faltered, her breath caught. I can't. You're not performing, Graham said gently. You're remembering. Clarissa looked at him, eyes brimming. I thought if I buried that part of me the pain would go with it. It never goes, Graham said. But when you play, it softens. She turned back to the keys and finished the piece. When the final note faded, Lena whispered, That's what the stars sound like. Clarissa covered her face with her hands overcome, but it wasn't shame. It was release. That evening, Lena fell asleep with a tiny sketch on her nightstand, 3 figures at a piano with swirls of color pouring from the keys. Clarissa lingered in the doorway, arms folded, watching her breathe. She didn't flinch when I kissed her forehead, she said softly. Graham stood beside her. She's not afraid of you anymore. Clarissa looked at him. I was never trying to scare her, no, he said. But sometimes silence from the ones we love feels louder than yelling. She nodded slowly. I built a life with no room for sound, and then I wondered why no one was singing. Graham leaned against the wall watching her, but now the music's back. Clarissa smiled faintly. Because you brought it. He shook his head. No, I just waited long enough for you to pick it back up. She looked at him, really looked. Why are you like this? He raised an eyebrow. Like what? So calm, so patient, like still water, he exhaled. Because I used to be fire, rushed everything, burned through people. Then life slowed me down. Clarissa asked, What slowed you? Loss, he said simply, and a daughter who needed me to stop fixing everything and just sit with her in the quiet. Clarissa looked down the hall toward Lena's room. I wish I had known that sooner. You know it now, he said. That's what matters. She stepped closer, brushing a speck of lint off his sleeve. You always leave before I ask you to stay. I don't want to overstay, he replied. Maybe she whispered you haven't stayed long enough. Graham didn't answer. He didn't need to, because that night he didn't leave at all. The next morning, Lena found them sitting in the sunroom, Clarissa in Graham's flannel, her feet tucked under her, reading an old sheet of music aloud. Graham was whistling along, matching her pitch perfectly. Lena crawled into Clarissa's lap and whispered, Can we make a room where other kids can feel this safe too? Clarissa blinked. What do you mean? A music room, Lena said, but not for notes, for listening. Graham looked up. You want to build a place where silence is safe? Lena nodded. Some kids don't talk, but they still want to be heard. Clarissa looked at Graham, and in her eyes he saw not just agreement, but purpose. Hope. Fire, the kind that doesn't burn, but builds. That night, Clarissa stood at the window with a pen in hand, sketching a room on paper, a wide-open room. Soft rugs, instruments, blank walls ready for color, and at the top of the page she wrote, "The Listening Room, for children who speak in color, rhythm, and silence." She looked at Graham, who stood behind her, arms wrapped around her waist. "Think we can build this?" she asked. He kissed her temple. "We already are." The architect rolled out the blueprint with a gentle flourish. "We can do sensory paneling along this wall, acoustic insulation here, and natural light, as much as the code allows." Clarissa nodded slowly, her gaze scanning every line of the plan like it held more than a floor, like it held a future. Graham stood beside her, arms crossed, his usual flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, eyes calm. But his heart wasn't. Because she wasn't just building a room, she was rewriting her story. The listening room, the architect continued, isn't just a name. It's a philosophy. We can design for that, but you have to define it. Clarissa didn't look up. It's a place where children don't have to prove they're worth hearing. The architect blinked. "That should be on the door." "It will be," she said, "in every language we can fit." When the team left, Clarissa remained at the drafting table, staring at the light filtering through the window, casting soft shadows across the plans. Graham approached her quiet. "You okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Then softly, "I was offered the CEO chair of the new parent company this morning." Graham paused. "That's a massive opportunity." She nodded. "The highest title, the biggest platform, a corner office that overlooks half the skyline." And Clarissa turned to him, voice trembling. "They said I'd need to shelve this project. The listening room. Not cancel it, but delay it. Indefinitely." Graham's jaw tightened. "Because it doesn't make money. Because it doesn't make headlines the way mergers do." He stepped closer. "What did you say I asked for 24 hours to think?" A long silence. Then Graham said quietly, "When people show you what they value, believe them." Clarissa leaned against the table, her hands flat on the blueprint. "They think this is just a vanity project, that I'm indulging a phase because of Lena." He gently tapped the edge of the plan. "This isn't indulgence. This is the first time I've seen you invest in something that gives back without asking first." She looked at him, vulnerable in a way that no title ever allowed her to be. "Do you think I'm choosing wrong?" Graham met her eyes. "I think, for the first time in a long time, you're not choosing what makes you look powerful. You're choosing what makes you feel human." Tears welled, but she blinked them back. "I spent so long earning a seat at their table," she whispered. "Now I realize. I built my life in a room where no one knew how to listen." He stepped forward, gently cupped her face. "Then build a new table, and fill the chairs with people who don't talk to impress, only to connect." Clarissa nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. "Then I choose this." Graham smiled. "Then you just redefined success." Weeks passed in quiet momentum. The listening room took shape, painted walls in muted pastels, touchable textures, open corners with no harsh lines. A space designed not to stimulate but to soothe, not to provoke but to invite. Lena painted a mural on the back wall, soft shapes, abstract waves of blue and yellow and lavender. One afternoon she turned to Clarissa. "When will other kids come?" Clarissa knelt beside her. "Soon, baby, as soon as we open the doors." Lena nodded. "Will it feel like home to them?" Clarissa looked around. "If we've done it right, it won't feel like anything. It'll let them feel everything else." On the night before opening day, Clarissa and Graham sat together in the middle of the empty space, backs resting against the wall legs stretched in front of them. The soft hum of the building was the only soundtrack. "I had 3 interviews scheduled for today," Clarissa said. "TV segments, business journals. I canceled them all." "Why?" She leaned her head back. "Because I realized something. If I need to explain why this matters, I'm probably talking to the wrong people." Graham turned to her, smiling. "That's the bravest thing you've said all week." She looked at him. And you still want to mop the halls of a listening room? He chuckled. It's not about the job, it's about the echo. The echo, he tapped his chest. The echo it leaves inside. Clarissa grew quiet, then said, almost afraid to ask, Do you ever miss the life you had before? He didn't hesitate. No, because back then I was performing healing. Now, I'm living it. She placed her hand over his. I think I spent years treating silence like failure. And now? Now I know. Silence is an invitation. Graham's voice softened. And you finally RSVP'd. The next morning, Clarissa stood outside the glass doors, heart pounding in a way not even billion-dollar deals had ever made her feel. Lena stood beside her in a yellow dress holding a small pair of children's scissors. Clarissa turned to her daughter. You ready to cut the ribbon? Lena nodded, then looked up at her mom. Are you? Clarissa blinked hard, then whispered, yes, finally. Together, they cut the ribbon, and for the first time in a long time, Clarissa Whitmore didn't walk into a launch as a CEO, but as a mother and a listener. The listening room pulsed softly with life. No loud music, no grand speeches, no streaming confetti, just children. Barefoot, curious, unfiltered. Some hummed softly to themselves. Others whispered to the walls as if testing whether this place could hold their secrets. A boy in the corner tapped a wooden block to the rhythm of his breath. A girl sat by the window tracing the shape of the sun with a crayon yellow, not because she was told to, but because it felt right. Clarissa stood at the threshold watching it all unfold. Her arms were crossed, but her hands weren't clenched. Her blazer was gone. She wore a soft linen dress and a quiet, knowing smile. Looks like it's working, Graham said, beside her, rolling up the sleeves of his shirt as he carried in a fresh box of chalk and sketch pads. Clarissa didn't take her eyes off the children. It's not working, she murmured. He glanced at her, brow lifted. She turned toward him and smiled wider. It's breathing. Graham nodded. That's better. In the center of the room, Lena sat cross-legged beside Becca Graham's daughter, wise beyond her 10 years. The two of them had been inseparable since the first planning day. Lena was now drawing with a new set of pastels. Becca leaned over and whispered something that made Lena giggle. Clarissa whispered, I forgot what her laugh sounded like. You didn't forget, Graham said gently. You just stopped recognizing it without subtitles. Clarissa turned to him. I never knew healing could be this quiet. Graham's voice dropped to something close to reverence. That's because healing isn't a performance. It's a room with the door left open. She swallowed emotion thick in her throat. You taught me that, he chuckled. No, she did. They stood there side by side as the room shifted and flowed around them, no instructions, no curriculum. Just children learning to be. Just people remembering how to listen. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped into the golden hour, Clarissa led Lena and Becca into the garden just behind the center, once a neglected patch of stone and weeds, now transformed into a soft space with wildflowers and worn benches. Graham knelt by a patch of bluebells, guiding a small hand toward the soil. Gently, Lena. Roots aren't afraid of growing, but they need space. Lena pressed the earth carefully, then sat back on her heels. I want to plant yellow ones next. Clarissa crouched beside her. Why yellow? Lena looked at her mother, eyes clear. Because blue is safe, but yellow is brave. Clarissa felt a lump in her throat she didn't try to swallow. She reached into her satchel and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. I found this in storage, she said. She unwrapped it. An old paintbrush, worn but intact, and a folded canvas. I used to think if I painted again it would mean I failed at what I became. Graham took the brush from her hand, turned it over in his fingers, and now Clarissa looked at Lena. At some point I stopped asking who I wanted to be, and started asking who she needed me to become. She looked back at Graham. Turns out, I'm not one thing. I'm every part of me I used to rush past. He smiled. Then you're finally whole. They sat in the garden long after the sun dipped behind the skyline, watching Lena and Becca line up wildflowers by color, shape, and whim. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was sacred. That night, as the center lights dimmed, Clarissa and Graham tucked Lena and Becca into the soft reading nook at the back of the listening room. Lena looked up, blinking sleepily. "Are you staying tonight?" Clarissa brushed a lock of hair from her forehead. "Do you want me to?" Lena nodded. "But not because you have to." Clarissa smiled. "No, because I want to." Graham knelt beside them. "You girls have made this place real." Becca yawned. "We just drew stuff." "No," Graham said. "You drew a way back to ourselves." Outside, Clarissa and Graham sat under the string lights that hung low over the garden. She leaned her head on his shoulder, soft and unhurried. "Do you ever miss the life you had before?" He paused. "No," he said, "because this," he gestured to the glowing windows, the laughter, the stillness, "this feels like what all the noise was trying to cover up." Clarissa turned to him, her eyes reflecting the lights. "When you walked into that restaurant lobby, did you know you'd end up here? Not even close," he said. "And if I had told you that you'd change my life," with a whistle and a folded napkin, he grinned, "I would have asked what you were drinking." They both laughed and then sat in silence, content. After a while, Clarissa whispered, "Thank you for staying." Graham took her hand. "I never left. I was just waiting for you to see me." She kissed his shoulder. "I see you now. And I see you," he said. "Not the CEO, not the warrior, just you." Clarissa closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, not from pain but from finally laying it down. And in that garden under the stars and soft light surrounded by laughter and soil and crayons still drying on canvas, she finally exhaled. The next morning, Lena ran to her mother with a drawing in hand. 3 stick figures. One had curly hair, one had glasses, one had a braid holding a yellow sun. Above them, in bold crayon letters, "This is the room that listened back." Clarissa framed it that afternoon, hung it by the door, and every time someone walked in, they didn't ask what this place did. They just stood quietly and felt what it was. Home. Not a building,